Hi, and welcome to our virtual talk with Anne Diggory tonight. I'm Kelsey Lynn Mayo, the exhibition manager here at View. Tonight we'll be talking with Anne, based out of Saratoga Springs, a painter and I would say some mixed media as well. She will be talking about her process and inspirations behind her pieces tonight. Anne, I'll hand it over to you.
Oh, thank you, Kelsey. And just a warning to people, there's a thunderstorm passing through Saratoga Springs. So if there's a flicker or something, that's what's going on. We're supposed to be under a thunderstorm watch right now. What I'm going to do initially is talk about the whole show, walk you through the show, and then focus in on approximately 5 pieces, just to give you a more in-depth view. And the title Fluid Forces pretty much refers to almost all my work, whether it's a still life or mountain. I always try to create movements through paintings, trying to get a sense of energy there. Dynamic instability is something I kind of am stuck on. I really like that kind of energy. And so for this show, which is based on water, that was fairly easy to come up with things that had that fluid forces because water itself is fluid. And the show includes work from the earliest piece, I think, is 2007. And then it goes up to work completed this year. Half of the works, though, are in the past 5 years. And actually, I forget, 15 of them are done within the last year, since last March. I made an effort to come up to the Old Forge area and do some painting there. And plus I'm always finishing new paintings for that. So that's what's in the show. What I'm going to do first is show a video walking through the gallery, and it's only going to take a minute to see the whole show. And what I'd like you to do is just think about the variety of forms, whether the water's flowing left or right, how much water's in it. Don't get really specific about each painting. This is sort of what I do when I walk into a gallery. I kind of span the whole room, and then I pick something to look at very carefully. And so I'm going to give you sort of that experience that I've had, and then I'll pick out a few. So I'm going to screen share.
I also wanted to mention that Q&A will be at the end, and to make sure you put your questions in the Q&A part, not the chat. That'd be very helpful. Thank you.
Yes. And one other thing about the exhibition, I was invited to this to do this exhibit by The View, and then it was curated by Carolyn Welsh, who did a marvelous job of picking out works about a year ago, last March. And then I've been painting ever since. So we figured ways to get the newer work in and not bump out too much of the older work. So thank you very much to Caroline for that work. Let me share a screen. So this is the very beginning entrance to the show, called Fluid Forces, Adirondack Paintings by Anne Diggory. And in this, you can see there's a lot of light in the space. There's a strange little corner painting and a lot of other paintings around the room. So what I'm going to do is start over there on the left-hand side and just walk around the gallery very roughly with my handheld camera. It starts with 2 paintings based on some cliffs up by Plattsburgh, where I went to get my inoculation for COVID and saw these cliffs and stayed and painted. But that's enough of a story. Let's keep going. So I'm just going to walk around. You get to see a glimpse of various kinds of work. This is digital work with painting, and these first 2 are also that. They involve painting and photography. And then there's a study for that next to it, one of the few drawings in the show. And then as you go around the corner, another one of Northwest Bay Brook. That's an older piece, but interesting to be part of the show. And then the Ausable River at Jay and at Keene. Now we're going to lakes. There are lakes in the show, done based on a canoe trip. And then Some smaller works at the top, two on either side done from my canoe. And then the one, so this is the study for the lake one. This is Bog River Falls, and then also Big Moose Lake. The entrance to Racket Lake, the Ausable, and the St. Regis rivers. That's the St. Regis River, that's the newest piece. And then another one of the Ausable River. And this one based on a canoe trip on the Bog River. And then coming around, finally, some quiet paintings. They're not so turbulent, from St. Regis Lake, and from the area around. That's from Green Bridge, and at last from Inlet, looking into Fourth Lake. And ending on three paintings that I'll start the talk with that are from Northwest Bay Brook. Okay, so what we have here, the three paintings, there's one on the little one is a study of Stiles Brook in the winter, that sense of looking through, but we're talking mainly about these two. The one on the top is the oldest painting in the show. It's called Change of Course, which is sort of a play on change, of course, and change of course. It's a place where the river bends dramatically, and I've done probably 15, 18 paintings or drawings from this area, because no matter what the light is, what the colors are, there's always something fascinating there. The one on the bottom, called In Suspension, is one that I'm going to focus on in great detail. This painting was done, you see the dates, March 13th to April 22nd, 2020. You'll remember that was the very beginning of the pandemic, where all of a sudden we were supposed to isolate. For me, what happened is I had a show, there was a solo show was supposed to open in New York City in March. And I had to make the terrible decision to myself, but it helps with anxiety to cancel that show. So all of a sudden, in the middle of March, I'm dealing with that anxiety of not having done what I prepared, wondering what I should do. So I decided to head up to my favorite waterfall and just look for something. I knew I'd find something there. And it was sort of a question of both distraction, looking for solace, and also just looking for some direction. What am I going to do next? How long is this going to last? And when I got there, I was kind of amazed that never before had I seen this log based across the water there. And it was obviously from some catastrophic flood that had lifted this log down the stream. And to me, it sort of resonated with my sense of suspended animation, sort of like all of a sudden there was a catastrophe and now we're waiting to see what's next. So I decided that would be what I would focus on. So this is a short video about that experience. It takes, I think it's about a minute long from the first sketch I did until it's finished. And then I'll do a second video, which is actually painting the water. So you'll get to hear the stream, which I can't do. So I guess I've got to put this. Well, the sound is not playing. That's interesting. Oh, there we go. So that's what I'm inspired by. And then you can see me sketching there, doing the sketch that I did. And then I started in the studio, just getting it roughed in, took it to the stream, painted a day, came back another day and painted some more, came back a third day and painted. And then that's when they said, don't travel, stay home. So I stayed home and worked in the studio for the next 4 weeks, working on and finishing it. So that's as it's finished. So by April 22nd, I pretty much had it done with that. So this is a video that I made to show how I painted the water. So again, my voice will be on the video. Nope, that was supposed to be that. Okay. Painting the water. Okay, here we go. An important part of my painting in suspension takes place where the water makes a dramatic bend around some rocks at Northwest Bay Brook. The challenge often in the fun is to find shapes that evoke that movement swirling down the stream. And I find it easier actually to work from the actual moving water instead of from a photograph. I find that both linear elements and the right kind of curve can help establish the plane of the water as it's quite varied and bumps up and over rocks and around the curve. Right at the shoreline, there's a nice dance between the darks in the shore and the darks in the water. In the center of the falls, the water actually casts shadows, which can be fun to play with to make the volume more believable and to make the light more sparkling. Back in the studio, I started adding some very tiny details with a brush that was a little ragged and could make interesting marks, some skinny, some fat, some blurred. And I would alternately load up my brush with a lot of paint or just a little paint, depending on how much of a mark I wanted to make. I added some blue to my brush so that I could glaze over the white shapes of the water falling over the rocks. That way I could keep the shapes that the water was making, but have a sense of a darker, bluer light falling across. Step back and look to see if it's working. Every now and then go in and add some more. Now I've got a little bit of white on the brush, smearing it a little to get movement. Stepping back to check to see if it works. And going into some other sections here, I'm really just scumbling in just a little bit of color to change it slightly. Going in after the darks, help the sense of there are rocks underneath that water. Probably each part of the water has about 5 or 6 layers of paint, sketching it out, adding darks, adding lights, going back with darks, going back with lights again, until it starts to make a little sense. I'm paying attention to photographs I had taken, maybe watching videos a little bit, mainly working with trying to make it a believable space with what I know about water and what might work in terms of pulling the eye both across and down the water and back into the distance, anything that keep the energy going that I felt. Part of the challenge with some of the little details is how much detail to put in, how many little specks of light. And it's just an experiment. I keep adding them in, taking them out, smushing them with the end of my brush to make them move, bringing out some darks. In this particular painting, I was trying to pull together a lot of disparate elements in the landscape that all seem to dance together. And by adding a lot of detail in some of the parts, each part became a very important part of the whole. So the final painting, you can see a lot more detail has been added. I worked a lot on getting the colors, the green and the water, various things. I worked a lot at the end on getting sort of a sense of a circular structure so your eye would keep going round and around. The rocks in the foreground were dark, then they were light, then they were dark again. Sometimes I don't know how it's going to work out and if it's going to work out. If I knew how it was going to end up when I started, I probably wouldn't start. Part of it's the fun is the mystery of how it's all going to come out. So now we're going to move on to another work that it's an earlier work, yet it also was involved in that sense of what is permanent, what is still, what is moving. I was invited to have a show at the Hyde Collection in Glens Falls. And they had I looked at the space and they had a wonderful spot for a corner painting. I had done 2 previously for exhibitions. And I thought, oh, this would be another chance to do another one. So I said, okay, so where should I go to get that material? This is the close-up of the painting. So it basically the corner splits right between the 2 rocks. And the water goes down and you'll say, okay, so there's something a little weird about this one. It's in a corner. It has weird sort of strange edges. It has some photography in it. It has some painting in it. And part of that is, and it's a big painting. It's over 100 inches total. There's a lot of detail. Your eye keeps running around from one section to another. And part of the reason for all those strange edges in the end was to keep that sense of moving, a sense of only a momentary feeling, but also a structure. So what we're going to see is I said, okay, I'm going to do that location. I went up to in July, the show was going to be in 2014. So in the summer of 2013, I went up to Buttermilk Falls near Long Lake and did a couple paintings. I had been artist in residence there at the museum, and so I knew the area pretty well. There's one day there's this beautiful pool of water with the 2 rocks. I thought that might be nice to use. I looked at what the water was doing below the rocks. Oh, that'll be nice to use. So I went back to the studio. The photograph on the right is a collage of some of the photographs I had taken on a day when there was no water coming over there. And then I combined it in Photoshop, which allows you to layer images and then erase through some to see other details. And so this is the file I made. I thought, oh, this will work. This has, that sense of here and there coming from the distance, going to downstream. This will probably work. So I took it to Kinko's and had them printed on black and white paper inexpensively, put it in the corner of my studio. And I thought, oh, this does not work. This is very static. It's sort of stuck in the corner there. So I said, okay, gotta try something else. I went back up to the stream in September, did a whole bunch of painting, drawings and sketches and photographs of what happened after those falls. As the light went down, it reflected across the trees. I thought, okay, now I have enough material. I then spent the next month or so combining my paintings and the photographs, had what I wanted, and I had a catastrophic fail of my hard drive without a backup. So all of a sudden, all the photographs I had taken, all the photos and paintings were gone. So I said, okay, I'm going back up to the stream. I sent my hard drive off to some high-tech place in New Jersey. They fortunately were able to retrieve the photos. But I did a sketch of the rocks on this brown paper. I took some photos. The leaves were gone, and there's this beautiful set of trees with a curve. So I had new photos and a new drawing, and I said, okay, we're going to try this again. So working for about a month, combining, testing, I came up with this digital file, very large scale, that I would then paint on. So if you see here, there's this is that you see the color there is a remnant of the drawing. This is a remnant of both photograph and paint. There's some of the painting. So I'm using just fragments of both photographs and fragments of paintings. This is a very sharp photograph in the distance here. And I left a lot. I wanted this turbulence to be paint. I didn't mind if, some of this was thin photography, but I wanted this to really be heavy duty paint. In the end, this is what it looked like when I painted on, I had a printer who would print on canvas for me from my digital files, and she printed it. I put it on 2 separate canvases, which I could hang at corners. This is as if they were not in a corner, but just straight. So that you can barely see, this is the division line between the left wall and the right wall. But you can see I really repainted this whole section, playing with the water. This is all now turbulent paint itself with a shadow. This pretty much stayed. I like the idea that drew you right across the stream. You said, okay, oh, I'm over there. And then in this area, sort of both the photograph and the paint just fell apart as it went off into the distance. Let me go back, and again, you can see that change. So this is what was printed. And then this is what I painted, and then displayed in a corner. So again, what I'm going to do with this is a video, so you get a sense of the 3-dimensionality of it, of sort of handheld view of coming in to the painting. So starting upstream, looking at the water, coming in, feeling that corner, and then feeling it go down. So it's just a very quick view of what it's like to experience that in 3 dimensions. Oops. So let me just go back to that a minute. So to some extent, this was important for me. It's called coming and going, the idea of looking back in the past, coming towards you, and then disappearing off on the other side. And that one section, let me go back one. I meant to point that out. Has the trees in the distance that were from that photograph. So that was a very exciting thing. I was very pleased with how that came out. And it looks very radical to me now, all that rough edge that I really do like. The next ones in the show, which I'm not going to talk about in detail, these 3 larger pieces are also combining, I'll call them hybrids. They combine photography and painting. But this first one is a little more mysterious. You really aren't sure exactly what's happening. And I like that. I like the idea that somebody will come in and say, so what's going on here? Because that's exactly how I feel when I look at a landscape. I'm saying, so what's going on here? What are the shapes? What are the lines? What are the colors? So it sort of pulls you in. And as does this one. This one has a little more artificiality left in with the edges of photographs. But in the center here, it seems to be more painting. So we're going to move on to the next ones in the row. For this show, in the same way that I did the corner painting for a specific show, a year ago, I knew that I was having this show about water. So I set a challenge for myself. I said, how about do some paintings that are mainly water? The water's not just running through the landscape. It is the landscape. I took off I made a reservation for 3 nights at a bed and breakfast up in Jay, along the Ausable River, and said, I'm going to find something up there to paint. So I discovered this view on the left of the river just before it goes under the covered bridge. And the one on the right is in the town of Keene, looking from Halls Falls Bridge. So they're both part of a series I'm doing on the Ausable River, of the whole watershed as it leaves from Mount Marcy, and the Ausable Lakes flow separately, join, and then flow all the way up to Champlain. I'm doing a project. I've been working a little bit with the Ausable River Association to try to figure out how to visualize this and help people understand the watershed through my painting. So I hope to have a show related to that more in the future. So the first one, this is where I decided to set up. It was sort of a gray day, but I was hopeful that the sun might come out the next day. So day 1, I set up here by the river and starting to try to figure it out. This is a short video. Then you'll get a sense what I use the videos for, and I'll try to stop it as it goes, is when I play them at home, I can pick out a shape that maybe I hadn't seen before, or that was better, or just get a better understanding of the flowing water, because I find painting from actual photographs to be not as informative. So I will often sit and watch these. So here's the water flowing. I turned off the sound so I could talk. Watch this marvelous shape keep changing. So I have the option of taking just about any shape I want. So if I pause that, at the bottom, you'll see there's a horizontal shape. Is that a good one? Or I could say, oh, how about more of an angle there? So it gives me a lot of options for when I want to work on the painting. So here's a still shot of that area. And again, you see that strange floating shape, which just kept spinning around the whole time I was there. What I first do when I get to a place is I start trying to figure out what the shapes are, what's the structure of the landscape. So I try to figure out, I'm doing this in my head, but I'm just showing you what I was thinking about. I would say to myself, oh, there are all these horizontals that slowly open up like a set of steps, and then they open up. If there had been another step there, they would start turning in space. And then the water sort of works against, swirls over those steps, usually in curves of various sorts, or straightening going across. So once I can sort of start seeing it, then I can start painting it and start picking shapes that would do it. When it gets down to this last rock, it sort of splits nicely, which was, to me, I purposely gave the bottom half of the painting, or the bottom third was going to be the focus for me. So here I am, day one. I painted about 3.5 hours because I would work on other things both morning and late as the light was different, or exploring with friends. So I pretty much got those horizontal lines and some sense of what the water was doing. And then at the end of the day, I just made some wild shapes at the bottom, thinking, I know I want this to be kind of exuberant and moving and whatever. I have no idea what it's going to do, but let me just mark it. And you can see I'm working on a tan canvas. The advantage of that I've stained ahead of time, so I can immediately start painting the whites. I don't have to wait until I build up the darks to create the whites. So that is kind of helpful. Okay, day two, certainly what was nice was the water had, the sun had come out a little bit. There were, more sense of what's happening with there. I was able to get this tone all the way to the bottom, start playing with the top. You'll see the mountain grew a little bit, but actually I moved this up a little bit. I wanted less sky. I wanted a shape that would work with these shapes. And you can see these two little people that are standing there. They eventually get removed from the painting. I decided I didn't want that human element in it. And then here we are. They're still in the painting at this point, though. Day three, there was a storm coming, so I painted until about very specifically, I looked at my photographs. 1:45, I felt I had to take off and miss the bad weather. But by then I had pretty much painted the whole surface. Everything had been touched at least once. I had a sense of where this floating shape was going to be. It had a neighbor over here that sort of set up a dialogue. And I liked it. I really enjoyed doing it. I brought it back to the studio at that point, and I worked for a couple of weeks. And I was happy with it, put it aside, and only brought it out again this past March when I was looking to get ready for this show. And in the meantime, I had painted some of the spring runoff on a different part of the river. And then you can see a real difference here in terms, I really wanted to get that sense of volume of sculpture, that the water was sculptural. Water can be, transparent. It can be reflective. It can show movement. So in that sense, I played these shapes changed quite a bit. I started setting up circles that would set a surface. Got this to spin a little more, added some dark. I mean, we could stand here forever and talk about what the changes were. And it's not as if I sit down and think it through. It's pretty much an intuitive, oh, this could help, this could help. And try it, and it didn't work. I paint it back out again. I often take photographs of each state so I can go back in case I lost something. You see a big change here in the diagonals from that. And here's the close-up of the final one, where you see some of it is painted very, very thinly, but some has a chunkier feel to it, playing with that. But the hardest part with churning water is you get that sense of color underneath, and you have to somehow get that sense of that movement. So in contrast to all that activity, this has a lot of activity right at the lip as it flows over. I was intrigued by this pool that is, you can see from the Hulls Falls Bridge. And as I laid it out, I was talking earlier with Kelsey about tonal studies. This is almost a tonal study in a way of getting a sense of where are the darkest darks, where will the lightest lights be, though, because this was not a toned canvas, I couldn't lay out all of the lights yet.
Because you're not always doing value studies every time you.
No, I don't do a value study. I do them in my head, or I do them as I lay out the first colors. I sort of laying out both the initial important colors, like that was going to be the most important color of the orange. So yeah, so I'm thinking ahead. Is this going to be a really dark painting with a few lights, light painting with a few darks? I pretty much have figured that out before I've started the painting. So moving down the wall, we come to a series of paintings based on landscape around or waterscapes around Old Forge. This is based on Big Moose Lake, where I went on a canoe trip to paint. And this little tiny one here on the left is the study. And then here is on the right is a study of the inlet where I had been planning to go. And this is just because it fit, this is the Bog River waterfall there, and the entrance to Rocket Lake with this amazing little beaver dam there that kind of made some nice results. Anyway, back to the painting of Big Moose Lake. So this one's called Surface Tension. When you're dealing with lakes, you get a very different sense of space, because it's almost like you have a tabletop. On this tabletop, instead of pears, we have rocks. And there are edges and things on the tabletop, and there's something way in the distance. So you have a surface that things happen on it. The story behind this, as I was paddling out, it was around 3 o'clock, and I knew I only had about 4 hours of good light to paint, and the weather seemed pretty decent. That I really wasn't going to stay here on the Eastern Shore. I was headed over here in the distance, where I guess that's called Sunset Point. There, a little bit beyond that is an inlet with calm water that I had seen pictures of. So I was really headed over there, but this really, really interested me. There were the playfulness with the shapes of the clouds and the rocks. I love that deep dark. So it became for me a painting about divided attention, whether you're going to pay attention here or there. You're sort of visually going back and forth between the two, but this really is the seduction of looking at all of these beautiful shapes. And again, water is transparent, it's reflective, it's movement, and it has shape. So all those things really appealed to me in this location. So I'm paddling. This is the front of my hornbeck canoe. And this is one of the photographs I took while working. I spent about an hour doing the little study on the right called Paddling By. It's 6 by 6 inches on aluminum. I was working on aluminum to test out for a commission that I was coming up that I needed to paint on lightweight panels, and it worked pretty well. I spray painted it with a dark green self-etching primer that's sort of that dark green in the lower corner. And I liked how it was like working on a hard surface there. Ooh, let's go back. And those of you who know my talks about John Frederick Kensett and how I talk about how he changes the heights of mountains occasionally, here in the distance, that looks like a much shorter mountain. But the difference is a photograph actually makes things look smaller than they feel when you're there. When you have space and it feels bigger than it shows up in the photograph. I did exaggerate a little bit, but it's probably a truer sense of how that looked in terms of the space.
So, and when you're in your studio and you're referencing videos or photos, do you think about that when you're doing that?
I think about changing shapes, about what kind of space I want, what I can have artistic license for. Is that what you're talking about in terms of referencing?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, let me just show you. Maybe I'll be clearer in just a minute. This is a short video of, okay, so from a photograph, oh, I can see some shapes to paint. But the problem is I'm sitting in the canoe to paint, and this is what I'm seeing. So it's sort of a challenge to find the repeated patterns. The clouds are moving, but I just thought it'd be fun to show what it is I'm looking at. So when I'm back in the studio, this I'll show you when we get to another point of a use of the photography. When I was back in the studio in January, I decided, okay, I'm going to do a painting. I'm going to make that into a much bigger painting. And so I got out a toned canvas, and I was considering actually making it a monochromatic color painting somewhat. You see on the far right, there's a sheet of reproductions of paintings I had done years ago that were almost all blue, black, and white, giving a sense of kind of a mystery. And I thought, okay, I'll start that way and see what happens. It was, again, I often don't know what's going to happen. I just sort of start them out. So I've started out, it sort of looks, this is sort of my Turner phase, where everything is just in a mist. And I'm saying, okay, so exactly where do I want that edge of the shore? Where do I want that tree? Where do I want the clouds? It's just sort of getting a starting point, getting something on the canvas to start reacting to. Pretty much then after working it for a while, I've come up with a general structure. You have a sense of linear elements here going across, some sense of some circles that are helping to define the surface. I know I want some diagonals up there, but I don't quite know where I want to put the tree. I think I moved it over. It originally was here, and then I decided, no, I want it further over so that the distance is a much smaller area. So at that point, I often look back at my photographs, and my photographs showed me these really nice long fingers of light and dark, and then the light coming down across. So using that for the final painting, you can see if you look at a close-up of those shapes, I liked how the light caught the lip of that, and the shapes were sort of oval shapes, and that helped establish the space. So in the painting, I was able to find, and use some, I'm not copying those shapes, but they're giving me ideas about shapes. I got to a point where I said I needed some more light there, but since I could believe in the surface, I knew where to add and take out. At this point, I'm thinking more about the painting. What does the painting need? Is it still interesting enough here to pull you in? I kind of emphasize this fallen tree a little bit more toward the end. There was a tree over there. You can barely see it. But I'm really, and I don't expect someone to go out and count rocks and see for accuracy how many rocks there really were there. Sort of making them up a little bit at that point, but working on the sparkle as well. So again, here we are at the final painting. Some of the last things I did were adding the blue back in on the top for the reflection, but in the end, I left a lot of that blue sort of mysterious, not very detailed. There are no leaves on these trees except for maybe a suggestion in the distance. And that's a hard thing to work with, is how much detail. And it's always a problem for me in terms of when do you stop. There was a point earlier where I could have stopped with just the exuberance, but I really wanted that sense of the tabletop of the lake going way, way, way back with that. So that was my Big Moose Lake experience. So we've been quite turbulent. So this is I'm going to talk a little bit about this one on the lower left. These are much quieter paintings, and it's kind of a relief sometimes to do them. I realized last spring in March, I spent about 3 days staring at spring runoff and painting it, and it was such a relief to leave that and actually look at a horizon that wasn't moving. This is I think St. Regis Lake, St. and Harris Lake, and sunrise on a camping trip. Everybody lets me get up when I want to and paint. They stay in tents. This is from Green Bridge in Thendara, near Old Forge. This was just a beautiful evening there. So let me talk about this one in the lower corner. So there's a pedestrian bridge that goes over, and I was thinking as I got this together, I really like looking down from the bridge. You end up with a flatness that you then look off into space. So I'm there, and there are canoeists going by all the time, and there you can see the town in the distance. And and there's a flagpole and two chairs and these amazing colored canoes. So I thought, okay, what am I going to compose? So after about an hour, I had figured out a composition where I was going to probably leave the town out, mainly focus and leave just one chair because that was going to be just too complicated with the size. It's only 11 by 14. It'd be hard to get all that detail in. And I did what I often do. You paint the thing that you think might move. So if you like a cloud, you paint it before it disappears. I didn't know if the person who owned these canoes was going to come out and go paddling. So I thought I'd better figure this out right away. So I got that sense of the shapes, the dark on the yellow, what I wanted. So I was happy with that beginning. So on the left is how it looked after about 3.5 hours. I had gotten the color underneath the water, again, the transparency, the reflection, and a slight sense of movement, but very calm, maybe movement more back in here. And I liked it. At this point, there were things I liked about it. I liked kind of these cool shapes that echoed the bright greens with the bright orange. When I was there, it made a lot of sense. When I got back to the studio, I looked at that and I said, I really want to get a little more contrast. I want this water to be calmer in contrast. So I by adding detail on the right, just above the canoes, I was able to make this look calmer in contrast. This is much more active. It also, by eliminating and adding lights in here, the eye then circles back a little better to create that round space. And I softened the part of the shadow that was very dramatic over here, but I really felt I wanted a transition into this dark space. And I added a little canoeist way in the back to break it up. So I was very pleased with that. Of course, while I was painting, the fellow who owns them came out and took a swim, and it was tempting to put him in. But in the end, I like the idea of projecting yourself into the space. If there's nobody in it, you can actually picture yourself in it better. So to some extent, that's what I have for the show or for this talk. If you want to come, if you're in that area or you can travel, I'll be there a week from Saturday on the 22nd at 10 o'clock to give a in-person. We'll get to talk about more of the paintings. And then there are other ways to see the artwork, the entire show. If you go to diggory.com, there you can get links to all the pieces. You can follow me on the Instagram, Facebook, or Vimeo just by looking for Ann Diggory. And there's also a catalog I made. It's online. You don't have to buy it. You can see the whole thing. It's about 24 pages, and it's all about the show and a lot of the things that I've done with that. So let me stop share now. There, we're back. So this is the this is the catalog, but you can see it online. It works very well. Phew. Okay, we got through the whole show.
Got through the whole show. I have a couple questions for you, Anne.
Okay.
So a lot of this work is based on water, but that would have been because of the invite and the theme of water next to the juried show, Ripple and Roar, The Wonder of Water. And thank you for being the juror of awards for that. I was wondering, what are your other content like? What other things are you looking at other than water?
It's taken over. I mean, because of the show, it took over a lot of my energy this year. I am interested in things that have a lot of energy to them. So skies show up a lot, whether it's against a mountain. I don't often put people in. That's something I haven't done. I used to years ago. I live in Saratoga Springs. I painted a lot of people at the racetrack and crowds, but it was always lots and lots of things. Not a person, a portrait, but the light flickering across people in the same way that light is flickering across the rocks in a landscape. But I also like to paint the mess in my studio, the mess in the kitchen. I'm not into neatness for some reason. That's too much calm. I like the kind of after you've cooked a big dinner, all the stuff that's left, you don't have to clean up. You just do a painting of it. So that's been kind of an interesting side effect. I used to do an annual Thanksgiving painting where you start Thanksgiving dinner 2 hours early, and then you pick a point along the way to stop and paint all the stuff that you've gotten. You never have 15 yams or whatever. So it's always been fun. It's safe. I don't leave the turkey out, but it's I find there's a lot of the one I'm thinking of doing. I often do objects in front of my paintings, whether it's a stalk of Brussels sprouts in front of a waterfall. Right now, still in my head planning one with a water pitcher in front of a water picture. So, I do have fun with some of them.
So when you're trying to choose these locations, are you always looking for something that's going on a lot, or like how are they informed where you're choosing?
It's tough. Sometimes I think about it like you're choosing a restaurant to go to. You sort of know what you like. So you go, maybe to an area that has the kind of places you like. But sometimes I want to try something totally different. So I will go to maybe my favorite location, but pick a different side, or I'll pick the equivalent of something spicier. I'll get something with brighter colors or whatnot. Water is great because no matter how dark a day it is, it's going to reflect something. And so it works nicely as part of a motif. But that is a problem. I remember times when I would get in my car and start driving, and an hour later, I'd still be driving. I couldn't find anything that grabbed me. It almost has to hit me on several levels. It has to be translatable into paint, not photography. I mean, a photograph can take real textures are amazing in photography, but very hard to do in paint, and particularly in a small painting. So it has to be paintable. There have to be shapes that I can imagine how it's going to work. There has to be a dialogue going on. Some object is going to relate to another, but that's more about what angle I'm going to take. So it's a mystery to me sometimes as to what's going to appeal to me. I'll go on a friend's suggestion. Oh, have you looked at? And I'll drive there, and sometimes there's nothing to see, and sometimes I find a whole new place.
So I just want to make sure people know that you can type in questions in the Q&A at this point. We do have one question I'd like to share with you, Anne.
Okay.
How do you record liquid forms that appear for only a fraction of a second and then disappear? Do you have a vocabulary or grammar of such forms?
It's a good question. A lot of it is very intuitive. I'm often looking like some of those curls of water. I need something that's going to curl enough so that the plane of the water goes back in a certain way. And I'll watch to see maybe something like that'll happen, or I'll make it up. I've been painting water since some of my earliest painting. Well, actually I painted one in high school, but seriously, probably since the 1980, I did a whole series of waterfalls. And so I've got a vocabulary. What intrigues me is to see what's different about each one. And I've gotten interested more lately in getting the volumetric, the sense of the water going over the rocks. So I'm having to change my vocabulary, but I like that question in those terms because it is vocabulary. You're looking for kinds of shapes. I find funny, ragged brushes help a lot. Nothing smooth and fancy, that they create kind of a nice rough edge.
So we should give all our old brushes to you then.
But yeah, so it's finding the tools and the surfaces. When I switch back and forth from watercolor to acrylic, sometimes I'm having to look at different. If you have a pencil in your hand, you look for lines and tones. If you have a brush in your hand, you look for colors. But I would have a hard time giving a demonstration of this is how you paint water. I think you have to think about what is it that you want to convey about this water? Do you want to convey its movement? Do you want to convey its reflectivity, its transparency, that it's rougher than the land, that it's smoother than the land? So once you've figured out what the story is about that relationship, and what qualities you're looking for, there's no one way to paint water. You have to say, what is it about the water that I want to convey? And how can I use it to make something about an idea about permanence or whatever. And sometimes it's just a beautiful light and you're just trying to capture it.
So you said high school you were painting then too. So how did you get started as an artist?
Well, I was a good student, but changed high schools a lot. My father was in the military, and my senior year, I went to a new high school, and they required art to graduate. Even though I had a lot of art supplies and took classes as a kid and drew a lot, I never, really thought about taking art. So I took the required course and loved it and was doing very well at it. And one of our assigned extra credit was this was in Hawaii where I was living that year, and did a beach scene with water and waves and an island. My teacher helped me a little bit with it. But I had spent a lot of time around water as a kid, did a little camping. And then went off to college as a math major. I was very good at math, and it helped me get into college. I went to Yale with the first class of women, and was all set to be a math major. And by the second week of school, during which you can change all your courses, I had dropped math and picked up art history, and a lot of other courses that I hadn't originally signed up for, and ran with it. And then my freshman year, William Bailey, who's a very good painter, was my teacher, and he thought the whole world existed so that artists could make art. And that's, you're 18, you're good at it, and this man thinks, oh, this is what the world is created for. So I majored in it, graduated, took a year off, did some traveling, making art, worked as a scientific illustrator for a while, and then went back to painting graduate school, and then just kept painting. So basically, since graduating from college, I've been painting for 50 years.
Wow. It's incredible to think you started in such a different major and switched
Yes.
over. Yeah.
Comes handy when cutting frames and dealing with math.
Someone actually asked about frames. They asked if you make your own frame.
I do some. I actually have the local wood shop for the ones that are floating frames, the big ones. I have them cut a shape for me that I then can use. And the smaller ones I actually order online. It's a mix.
Okay, a couple other questions here. You paint both small, intimate paintings and huge murals. How do you approach them differently?
There's a difference in how colors work on a small piece. A little bit of yellow on a small painting looks fine. You blow that painting up, that yellow can become too big because there's just too much of that one color. It's something I discovered once when I was taking a small piece and making it bigger. I think you have to think about, I mean, it still has composition and whatnot, but in a larger painting, you can expect that the viewer is going to be looking all over. And so it's a different need for composition. It almost has to be, it isn't taken all in at once. So I have to work a little harder to lead the eye around through circles, repetitions, color, whatever, that it takes a little more to get a bigger painting to actually function. A small painting, you take it all at once and it looks like it all fits together. And I pick my subjects differently. Sometimes the small one, it needs like 3 or 4 major things happening, and that's just about it.
Great. Yeah, someone was also asking about the composition. Do you trust your instinct for composition, or do you have a diametric constant you depend on and can alternate?
No, I don't have a diagram or an idea there. I guess there are these theories of thirds or something. I actually get a big kick out of putting something dead center in the painting and then trying to play with it so that it has a dynamic feel around it. I like to break those rules. So composition for me is not, I don't plan that too far ahead, except I've felt some dialogue going on between a dark here and a light here. And so I want to find a place in the canvas where they'll speak to each other in that way. But I'll throw horizons way at the top, but in the middle, that it changes quite a bit.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. I see in the background you almost have a third composition happening.
Whoops.
So
Yes,
sometimes maybe you follow the rules, but not always.
that's right. Yes, yeah. That's a logs falling into the lake and then a distant view. So yeah.
Okay. We'll have one more question before we go. Somebody was wondering if you ever combine acrylic and watercolor into one painting.
Oh, sure. Particularly if I'm working on paper. I'll start maybe with watercolor, add if I need something. I like to work on brown paper, so that again, I can hit with whites right away. And sometimes I need the acrylics to actually extend that. And one trick I had for traveling is I will take my watercolor crayons and then take some acrylic medium with me and make them into acrylics
Hmm.
that you can draw with the watercolor crayons. And since the acrylic medium has a binder to it, that'll actually make them not water soluble once you've once you've added that to them. So sometimes I forget, one thing, I just mix them back and forth. It's
That's a good little trick there.
yeah.
Yeah. Easy to travel with as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you, Anne, so much. And I hope people can come and join us on the 22nd in the gallery, where you'll speak a bit more at 10 a.m. And thank you, all of you, for joining in with us. It's been great to have you, Anne. Sad to see your paintings will be going soon. I love
Oh,
to sit in the gallery and look at the corner one.
okay, well, thank you. Well,
Yeah.
it's great that you have that space because as you saw, a lot of the works I made were specifically for that show, and knowing that they were going to be seen helps an artist finish things instead of letting
Yeah,
them
keep you on track.
linger in the studio. But I appreciate the opportunity, and I appreciated Caroline's help in picking the works and arranging the show, which was also helpful.
Yep. Caroline was great that day. It was nice to see her in action. Lot to learn from.
Well, thank you very much.
Yep. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.